All right, we are now live. We will,
Impossible.
yeah, we will just wait a couple of minutes while we get people coming in here, and hopefully we'll be able to see the comments. Drop a comment when you join, so we know you're here. We are anxiously awaiting everyone attending this episode. I'm going to get our recorder going too, so I don't miss a word. Well, this is something. This will be our first I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere episode. We did Trifles on, was it Monday? Live recording of Trifles, and with a few technical glitches thrown in there just for measure, right? Because we don't believe in doing anything half measure. It was a little rough, but I think we got the hang of it, and hopefully we have some of those kinks worked out as folks join us here. Lori Velasquez, glad to see you here. Welcome. Glad you're here. I'm going to shoot a link out on our Twitter account just so people know from there where to go. We've got the stream going here on Facebook and YouTube. So wherever you get a chance to tune in from, that is fantastic. Rob Nunn is in the house, as is T. Rick Jones from my native New England. We have the sound files queued up. We have the quiz ready to go for this episode. I promised that we were going to do listener mail, but in listening to the voicemail, it was a wrong number. So I don't think I don't think we'll be playing that. Let me just get some more of the music queued up here. All right, folks gathering into the room. Looks like Nils Gampert is here from Germany. John Guillen. Glad all these familiar faces are with us. We're going to get started officially in just a moment. So
Bonnie McBird.
Hey, Bonnie.
How nice that you're here. You know, this is the part of the program where before we actually record anything, we talk about what we're going to be talking about. I can't wait to find out. And Margaret Lewis. Oh, Bob Katz. Excellent.
Sending a note out on Twitter.
Play the wrong number message. Yeah, I like that idea. It's a great idea.
It really wasn't that good. Wrong number message.
I put my bow tie on today. Actually, the odd thing, if this doesn't look straight, the fact is, it's really interesting. I found this out a while ago. The tie is straight. It's my head that's crooked.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah. You never steer your bow tie when you put your bow tie on. And I think you may be missing something.
You go around a corner like at a breakneck speed, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. Ann Mason's here. Drunk voicemail. No, unfortunately, it was not drunk voicemail. As much as people were talking about a drunk Judge Janine on Fox News last night, broadcasting from her home studio, where, of course, she has her box of wine. Ruben's in the house, as is Stephen Rusty Mason. Good to see you.
My bow tie is a Sherlockian logo.
Is it?
It's the soon-to-be official logo of Sherlock Holmes brand products.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. Well, I wore a non-Sherlockian bow tie today. Just wanted to mix it up a little bit.
Well, you can go change.
That's okay. I'm fine. Eric Deckers suggests putting a gyroscope on the bow tie so it stays straight. I think that's a fine idea.
I should put a gyroscope in my hat. That's a better idea.
Okay, I think we have all of the sound files queued up. So we are ready to, oh, you know what we haven't done? And folks, this is part of the beauty of going behind the scenes with us. Before the show recording starts, we kind of go back and forth with each other and try and determine what the title of the episode is going to be. And sometimes we don't do that until after we've recorded it. So in this case, we're going to put everything up front. And Burt, since it's just you and me here today, what do you think we should do for a title?
Journal of the Plague Year. You know, Daniel Defoe had really a big success with that back in the 18th century, and it's time again. You know, we should do that.
You know what? It was part of
It's out
my.
of copyright.
It is out of copyright, but it was
Yep.
part of my.
So is Daniel Defoe, actually.
Daniel Defoe. It was part of my newsletter a couple of weeks ago because it was in this episode or this edition of Lapham's Quarterly.
Yes, I read that. I read that and then washed my hands 400 times.
You do. We should do that after reading my newsletter anyway.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Episode 189. This is disease and discussion. I don't know.
Disease and discussion. Disease discussion.
Diseased minds. Okay. Anytime you want to go, Burt, we are ready to go.
I keep forgetting that I've got to do that. Okay.
You don't have this memorized by now?
I do have it memorized. I just like to read it. Okay, I'm all set. All set.
You're all set. Okay.
The joy of editing. Support. I'll give you a beat here.
Okay.
Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wes Express, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wesexpress.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 189, Disease and Discussion.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere.
A podcast for devotees of Mr.
No, cutting in and out.
Let's try that again. I just found out something about the mute button. Okay, here we go.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the bigger-treater regulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come any better time!
And what a great time it is to be here, part of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And boy, do we have a show in store for you today, folks. If you are watching this live on Facebook and YouTube, not only do you get to hear the dulcet tones of my counterpart, Mr. Burt Wolder, you also get to see us live and in person, or maybe you're watching the replay on video. Either way, it's a pleasure to see you here. Burt, how are things on the East Coast?
Oh, it's fine. Absolutely fine. You know, I was a little disturbed this morning. There was a big alert. It turns out that having more than 48 rolls of toilet paper in your house lowers your humidity and makes you more susceptible to infection. So it's a big issue for me because I put my entire 401k into toilet paper.
I put my 409k into toilet paper. I don't know if you heard about that. It's a little windy around here. We had thunderstorms overnight here in Michigan because, you know, this is clearly the end of days. It's the plague. We've got storms. I suppose next we've got locusts and boils coming. So we should be prepared for just about anything. But if you hear any wind noise coming in through the microphone, that's because well, it's bleeding and moaning outside, and it reminded me of that passage in the Five Orange Pips. We mentioned the Five Orange Pips as we were talking about loneliness and isolation in the last episode of Trifles, and this was that famous passage at the beginning of the Five Orange Pips where Watson says, "It was in the latter days of September, and the equinoctial gales had set in with exceptional violence. All day the wind had screamed and the rain had beaten against the windows, so that even here, in the heart of a great handmade London, we were forced to raise our minds for the instant from the routine of life, and to recognize the presence of those great elemental forces which shriek at mankind through the bars of civilization, like untamed beasts in a cage. As evening drew in, the storm grew higher and louder, and the wind cried and sobbed like a child in the chimney."
And Bonnie is in London, and she says she can hear the wind thumping down the fireplace.
Well, I want to know how Watson knew what a child in a chimney sounded like.
Well, that goes back to his boyhood, and his own father's approach to discipline, which worked well until the winter. And that's one of the reasons why Watson was so singed.
Wow, there you go. There you go. Well, for folks who are looking for the audio recorded version of this episode, it will be available at ihose.co/ihose189. You can find us on social media, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We are I Hear of Sherlock in all of those places. If you'd like to reach out, leave us an email. You can send an email to comment@ihearofsherlock.com. You can find our homepage at I Hear of Sherlock. That's where we have our PayPal and Patreon buttons, and we have had a few donations coming in recently to help support the show, and we do appreciate that. We are this close to getting to where we have enough to power every episode with a transcript. So let's keep on that if we can. And what's the other thing? If you'd like to call us and leave us a voicemail, we have the capability of that. And let's hope it's not a wrong number this time. The number there is 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing like a little trout on Sunday, is there? Well, I thought that in this case, in this episode, we would have a discussion. Just Burt and I, and all of you who happen to be tuning in live. We're going to take some comments along the way. But, of course, we wanted to begin by talking about the state of the Sherlockian world. We are in a kind of a difficult space now where a lot of spring meetings have been canceled. A number of science societies have decided to either cancel or postpone their events. And that means Sherlockians are not getting together the way they once were. And I think we've got ideas for how to remain connected. And a lot of it harkens back to the way Sherlockians began connecting with each other in early days. So, Burt, what are some of your observations as humanity has kind of gone to ground in the past couple of weeks? And what do you think that portends for Sherlockians?
Well, I think it pretends to big enrollments, big attendance, big signups for things like Scintillation of Scions in June. People, what I'm doing is finding things to look forward to. And, I never thought that I would be looking forward. Well, I usually look forward to going out to a restaurant or, meeting with people, but I never thought that I would be in such a dry spell without being able to do that with no immediate end in sight. So I think that big attendance, provided we bend the curve on this awful disease and things get back to something that looks like normal and people can gather again. Hopefully, certainly by June, maybe later in the summer, certainly in the fall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that leaves us with, kind of a void right now. And I know a lot of folks have been turning to online spaces. Bonnie McBird just popped in here, and we know Bonnie from a lot of online interactions. But the hounds of the internet, believe it or not, is still up and running. This is a group that was put together probably in, I want to say the early 90s, 1990, 1991, maybe. I think I joined in 1992, if I'm not mistaken. This was one of the original email discussion lists. And, you weren't necessarily speaking with people in real time. It was almost like having a group letter exchange. But the Hounds of the Internet is still alive and well. And I know you can find them if you go to Sherlockian.net. Their sign up instructions are there. We'll have a link to that in the show notes, so folks can check that out. There's also a Welcome Homes group, which was originally, I think, on Yahoo. It's part of Yahoo Groups. That's since moved. But that's another way, similar to the Hounds of the Internet, where people are sending emails, getting email digests back, and kind of having a correspondence with each other. So I think that's one way for people to remain in touch. Why don't we go back? And there are other online communities we'll talk about in just a moment. Why don't we go back to when the stories first came out, when the Strand magazine began publishing these tales by Dr. Watson, courtesy of his literary agent, Arthur Conan Doyle. What opportunity did people have to connect with each other and realize that there were other like-minded Sherlockians in the world during that time?
Wow. Well, that's a really good question. Not much, I don't think. I mean, Sherlockian scholarship, regardless of when you date the start, is generally dated. Well, first of all, I think Sherlockian scholarship and Sherlockians and being a Sherlockian and having the sort of passion, interest in the literature of Sherlock Holmes, goes back to the early 20th century, maybe the late 19th, but I think the early 20th century with Ronald Knox. So, which was in a university setting. I keep thinking, when you mention that, I keep thinking about coffee houses, which back in the 1860s and 1870s were a place people would go to read the newspaper. And there were a lot of literary societies, Conan Doyle himself. Oh, Ronald Knox and Sherlock Holmes. Yes, they were. There were a lot of literary societies and scientific societies. It was a great era for clubs. Conan Doyle himself, when he was in Portsmouth, was a member of the Portsmouth Scientific Society. People had special interest publications like the British Journal of Photography, which Conan Doyle contributed to, but there wasn't a Sherlockian kind of publication because it was too new, I guess. So it's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think correspondence was pretty much the sole way of connecting with other folks back then. Certainly letters to the editor of the Strand. Of course, people started sending letters directly to 221B Baker Street, and still do today, to engage the services of Mr. Holmes or to express their admiration for his methods and his tales. I think as you mentioned, Ronald Knox at Oxford, gave this presentation, and this was how Sherlockian activities were introduced to the world. It was kind of tongue in cheek because this was a takeoff on some of the religious research, biblical research that certainly Knox was familiar with in those times. But it quickly spread. We see people like, what was it? Dorothy Sayers in Unpopular Opinions began writing about the origin of Watson's first name and why his wife called him James. And H.W. Bell had begun some research in the 1920s. And then these began to take form in small publications, whether they were pamphlets or full-on books. You had people like Vincent Sterrett, who were engaging in this and collecting the thoughts of others. So I think very quickly, correspondence by, or at least introduction to other Sherlockians by publishing was certainly the way. And it's interesting because you compare that or contrast that with what we have today with this instant connection. We're still publishing. We're publishing a live video right now as we're recording this episode. It's a different way of, kind of taking control of the conversation or the topic that you want to talk about and sending it out into the world.
Yes, that's true. It's interesting, though. We were reviewing those things, and one of the things I was thinking about was there was probably no one less likely and less inclined and less temperamentally aligned with the idea of Sherlockian scholarship than Arthur Conan Doyle, which is one of the reasons why he was bemused, I think, by the early attempts, and somewhat surprised that anybody would be noting the fact that the state was wrong or this happened later and things like that. Because, he was physically active, a boxer, an outdoors kind of a guy, spent time on a whaler, was a great cricketer, ascended in a hot air balloon, promoted skiing. I mean, he was an enthusiastic photographer, and obviously a great writer, but he was not someone who was going to sit down and note in the stories and the literature that he loved, of course, and he wrote so much about his own library and the books that mattered to him. He would not write a chronology of the C. Auguste Dupin stories and about how Poe got this date wrong or that weather observation wrong. So it's interesting. He was not in and of anyway, I don't think, the community of people who found this literature interesting, like we do.
Yeah. Well, when you think about the Sherlock Holmes stories compared to his historical novels, you've got Sir Nigel and the White Company. Of course, there's that wonderful annotated White Company that Wessex Press just put out by Roy Pilot and Doug Elliott earlier this year. In those cases, Conan Doyle was, there it is, beautiful, beautiful copy. In those cases, Conan Doyle was writing in an enclosed environment, in a, I don't want to say a vacuum of sorts, but it was limited to that single novel. And just as we don't see inaccuracies within The Hound of the Baskervilles or within, well, I was going to say The Sign of Four, but there are dates that he gets wrong in The Sign of Four, aren't there?
Yeah,
where
big
we
dates,
begin April and go in September.
A couple of months within a few pages. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So is it that Conan Doyle simply didn't have an eye for details, or is it that those kinds of details simply were superfluous to the larger service of the story?
Well, I think he was focused on the story. I don't think he was. I don't think they were superfluous, but he was. He was a professional writer and enormously successful. And you get this, when you read, as an example, when you read that essay by Morley about the Blue Carbuncle, which we did a couple of years ago.
Love that.
One of the things when you read it aloud, you realize is that it's in sections. There's it's sort of done in thirds. And if you think about it, in the evening, he probably knocked out the first third of it and then went to bed or had a drink or did something else and then came back to it and then knocked off and then eventually finished it. And it is, a consistent narrative, but, it's not as if he sat down in one burst and wrote 5,000 words. And in the same way, I'm sure Conan Doyle, one of the reasons probably for the challenge in the dates is that he would sit down. I mean, after all, Sign of Four, is not a short story. And he would do a chunk of it and then come back. And perhaps he forgot that, 10 minutes ago it was July and now it's September or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, and some comments flowing in live as we're talking about this. Bonnie McBird makes a great point that analysts and fiction writers are two different breeds. I think that's that's a succinct and apt statement. I think it's not easy to be a fiction writer. I mean, Bonnie herself will tell you that. She's toiled very hard at it. Has 3 wonderful Sherlock Holmes books out that cover that. And I know we've talked with her a couple of times before on this show. when
Yes,
you
and Ashley points out the C in Arthur Conan Doyle really stands for continuity. I like that. Arthur Continuity Doyle. Yeah, it's very good. But
that's
it is storytelling. And then Eric, is a weekly writer. Sure, you refer back to old things and you forget what you wrote 2 weeks previously. I mean, we had lunch back in January with Mike Durda and quoted something from one of Mike's columns about political correctness in literature back in January. And Mike said, "Did I write that?" You know,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
sounds familiar. Sounds like something I would write.
without the search function on my computer, I would have a really difficult time in going back and finding some of the things that I wrote about. So, when you're that voluminous in your writing, when you create that much content over time, it's difficult to keep a catalog of that unless you have a photographic memory. So I get it. And Sherlockians, we're an interesting breed because, yes, we are more analysts than we are writers for the most part. I mean, obviously, a lot of us contribute to the scholarship of the subject. We write papers, we write toasts, etc., all at varying levels of expertise. And I think for the most part, we pay attention to the things that matter to us, and we have a laser-like focus on those 60 stories. And that's easy, right? That's easy. But when you are a creator and you're being inspired from so many other sources, and we know Conan Doyle was widely read from his Jesuit schooling, widely read simply by virtue of the time. Well, of course, it's difficult to keep a lot of those facts straight when you're going back to them. And over the course of 40 years, as he did as well, that's difficult.
Well, I remember reading somewhere, maybe it was in the Annotated White Company, that, for his true passion, which was recreating the 16th century, the early days of English history in the White Company and in Sir Nigel. And by the way, the reason I have this is that before we got started, I said to myself, why don't we talk at some point about things that we're grateful for? And so I just grabbed a couple of things. And this is one of the things that I'm grateful for, the Annotated White Company, which is really wonderful. But I remember reading somewhere about the extensive research. Well, of course, he was brought up in a way on many of these stories and was a fan of Walter Scott and other things. Not that that has anything to do with the White Company, but he must. I read somewhere about the intensive research he did about these times before he recreated this world and these people, and it's one of the reasons that make it so enduring. So for things like that, and today I'm sure Bonnie would agree. If you are writing a novel or writing a story, it's a great idea to know when it begins and when it ends and what's happening in the middle and how long it took to got here and when the days end and when the days begin. And so, writers have sort of extensive story arcs that they plot out so that they can keep track of all the people that they're busily creating and pushing around.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I don't pay any attention to anything I write or say, which on the one hand is probably irresponsible, but on the other hand gives me almost a constant feeling of discovery when I come back on something that I've written and can admire it all over again.
I like that. I like that. Well, and if it makes you feel any better, Burt,
nobody else does.
I don't pay much attention either. Yeah.
I didn't think
so. Getting back to this notion of connecting and finding a substitution for the connections that we have lost in the spring in particular, which is usually a boon of Sherlockian activity. We had the loss of Holmes, Doyle and Friends. I know you were going to speak at that in Dayton. We've had pretty much every Scion meeting. I don't need to list all of them, but I know for us, two of the most important ones were the Sons of the Copper Beeches and the Speckled Band of Boston. The former meeting only twice a year, the latter only meeting once a year. So these are lost opportunities that we may never regain later in the year. And there were at all of these events, there were going to be presentations. There were going to be places where people were going to stand up and, well, not necessarily give a talk. I'll be generous when I say give a talk. In most cases, read a paper at us. But there's that lost opportunity of hearing that scholarship. This is when we go right back to the beginning of the BSI, BSI dinners in the early 1940s. There was always a paper that was being given. Somebody had a treatise or a theorem on something, and they stood up at a lectern, or at least a stack of books on the dining room table there, and gave their talk. And they were hooted and hollered at in some cases, hisses and applause. And you can picture the cigar smoke-filled room. But this has always been part of what we do at Sherlockians. And it seems that now that we've got this, or we've got the discussion rooms we've always had with the Hounds of the Internet and Welcome Homes and whatnot, we lose that opportunity for that greater scholarship. It seems to me that there is an opportunity for us in doing something online. And this is part of why we're trying out this live video. We here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere have plans to bring virtual Scion meetings to you. Yes, that's right. You heard it here first. We are going to plan some kind of video interaction where people can show up. And we're not suggesting that everyone is going to be on video. We'll probably invite in, another guest at a time, give them the microphone, and create an opportunity to recreate these talks, or in some cases, recreate these papers, and let people have their say, and then have a discussion about it as we would at a Sherlockian meeting.
Yeah. And that'll, we should take advantage of the fantasy world of technology and try to recreate that. And I'm particularly excited about the idea of giving us somebody else the microphone, which because I miss it. I really miss finding out what's on other people's minds. And I remember when I look back on the conferences that I've enjoyed the most, even those that I wound up speaking at. What I remember are the great papers and observations. I remember, without recounting it all, but things that stick in my mind just when thinking about it are Bob Katz's thoughts about the death of Moriarty at Reichenbach, about reviews of the chemical experiments that Holmes was doing, about British pharmacopoeia in the 19th century, about von Herder and his air gun. And it's all great stuff. It really is great stuff. There are great minds associated. There's us, and then there are also great minds associated with all of this. And, a nice thing, too, is that doing it online gives us an opportunity to bring in younger people. And one of the things that I pulled together when I was thinking to myself, okay, let's grab 4 or 5 things, that I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for the Baker Street Journal, but
the leading of Sherlockian scholarship.
Yeah, I heard about that. 46. But I'm not, the most timely person when it comes to the Baker Street Journal. And because I have no memory, I can frequently go back and reread things and encounter them all over again for the first time. So for me, it's 2015, and the summer issue of 2015, and there's this great story here, this sort of review about Irregular Children, about the children of Sherlockians by Sonia on coming of age in a Sherlockian home. And one of the nice things here, in addition to this wonderful photograph of Betsy Rosenblatt that you can see as a small child, which will probably, and Andy Peck's son, which will humiliate her probably forever, is this line. We go into Sonia's story, and towards the end, she reports that when the Rosenblatts gave Betsy her very own canon when she was 10 years old, they wrote an inscription in it. And the inscription is, "Take this, your canon copy owned. for pleasures shared, innate or honed. The haze is thick between this end of 1983 and Baker Street and mystery. Yet knowing eyes can pierce the fog, and so can bring alive the world which lay in Watson's Tales, the world of 1895. And I just thought that was such a lovely thing to.
It is great, but it doesn't have the usual Albert Rosenblatt meter to it.
Well, perhaps that's why it's great. Well, maybe Julie wrote it. That's probably why.
That could be. That could be.
But
Well,
really is lovely. Really is lovely.
it is. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we take a short break from our chat here? We're going to bring in some of the commentary that we've been getting from some of our guests here, and we'll continue the conversation about how we continue the Sherlockian tradition while everyone is sequestered, quarantined, and socially distant. We want to be virtually close. So hang on, and we'll be right back after this message from our sponsor.
Oh, a sponsor message. The Wessex Press has been running around the clock to bring you a remarkable new book, The Annotated White Company, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's 1891 masterpiece, an historical adventure of the 15th century. 5 generations of kings from 2 rival dynasties fought for 100 years over the throne of the largest kingdom in Western Europe. It was the age of chivalry, a time of honor, courtesy, and patriotism, annotated now for the first time by Doug Elliott and Roy Pilot, who define unfamiliar terms, explain heraldic insignia, and describe the book's real-life characters, with a foreword by Nicholas Meyer and including the classic illustrations by N.C. Wyeth. Will Edward, the Black Prince, restore Peter of Castile to his throne? I'm not telling. Join the adventure by getting your copy of The White Company from WessexPress.com today.
You know, I think that was our first ever live read of a Wessex Press spot here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. It was really well done.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes. I decided to be alive today, but it won't last.
Well, we are back, and we are talking about life in the world of isolation for Sherlockians. You know, we are people, we are introverts, we are extroverts, but I think we all thrive off of the energy that we give to each other. And, you know, it's funny because there are even some among us who are shrinking violets when it comes to being in front of other people. We are naturally introverts, but there is such a thing as an extroverted introvert. I don't know if you've heard of that. Well, I don't want to call it a condition, but if you've heard of that kind of personality trait, Burt.
Oh, yeah. Well, people tend to rediscover things. Literature, quotations, observation, philosophy, insights from time to time. Years ago, it was the Myers-Briggs personality profile, which sort of created a series of questions, and based on your responses to the questions, you were positioned in a grid, sort of a grid. I'm trying to remember the axes. One was introverted and the other was extroverted, and I think one was concerned for self and concerned for others. And so you could find out which quadrant you spent most of your time in. Now I'm just remembering this, but they measured a couple of other things too, which was A, the degree of time you spent in other quadrants, but B, the ease with which you move from quadrant to quadrant.
Okay.
And this, what you're talking about here, extroverted introversion is sort of a piece of that. And the reason I mention that is I've seen this pop up again, in my own company. Our HR team sent out an instrument that was very Myers-Briggsy. But I guess the root of it could be that Myers-Briggs has fallen into disrepute. But, the basic the basic points, charting yourself, on a couple of axes and so on to attempt to give you a personality profile is pretty right. And I think when I went through that, which was very early in my career, I was one of those people who was, I guess you could say introverty, extroverty, that I could wander around. I wandered around the different quadrants pretty easily.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're a chameleon of sorts. I think we've always known that about you.
I thought it was a Chaldean.
Chaldean. While you were blending into the bookshelf in the background while you were talking.
Take me. Hey, now one of the comments we should mention is Howard Ostrom a couple of minutes ago said that Scintillation has been canceled, which I hadn't heard.
Oh dear. Well, it's not a surprise, really.
Oh, and Bonnie says she's certified in Myers-Briggs and teaches it in a writing class. How interesting. I'm very glad to know that's
fantastic.
It's still going.
And we have a bunch of people putting in their Myers-Briggs, INTJ, ESP. Rob Nunn says he's an ABCD. I'm an ACD.
No, if he's an ABCD, it means he's the murderer in an Agatha Christie story.
That's a problem. I'm ACDC. That's pretty much.
Well, I suspected that about you for a long time.
Not much of a Metallica guy. So Ashley said she ran an informal study on Sherlockian.net years ago, and the percentage of INTJs in the Sherlockian world is much higher than the average population. Wow. Well, I suppose that's why we have so many viewers here today and only 2 broadcasters.
Yeah, maybe. How interesting.
That's great.
Huh.
Great. Well, we mentioned the notion of virtual Scion meetings, papers, talks, discussions. Luann actually had a really good suggestion. She said, what about virtual tours? People taking us through their Sherlockian collection. She mentioned Denny Dobry taking us on a visual tour of his 221B Baker Street recreation in Reading, Pennsylvania. That would be absolutely fantastic if we can get Denny to stream with us. I don't know if he has the ability to do that kind of thing.
Well, but he could, anybody with a smartphone could make a video. Boy, it would be fun.
Glenn, you would think, Burt.
You would think. But Glenn, Glenn is a natural for this. I mean, some people like, Glenn has got so many wonderful things. I've never seen his collection, but I've certainly talked to you and seen photographs and talked to Glenn about what he is.
Yeah.
But even if you would take 5 minutes and say, we could come up with a podcast called "Let Me Show You This," and somebody takes one thing from their collection or one thing that means a lot to them and makes a little video and sends it in. That would be interesting.
Yeah. Well, and we might be able to do it in such a way where it doesn't require all of our participants, all of our collectees who would be showing off their collections, collectors, I should say, showing off their collections live. We could ask them to, just shoot it on a smartphone, send us the footage, and we could simply play it here with a screen share so people could watch it as we broadcast it, just as we've been playing the sound clips here.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
What you think doing a live commercial read was difficult? Wait until we try and sneak in video clips of Sherlockian collections. Really pushing the limit of our capabilities here.
Richard Olken, it's nice that Richard is here. One of the things I was thinking of is, since there's no speckled band meeting, that once this crisis, gather in Richard's house. And
I like that.
I think what I'll do is I'll show up first and then let you know. And we could have sort of a mini band meeting. 3 speakers, a couple of drinks.
You better be careful, because you run the risk of getting shot on site if you don't announce yourself.
Well, no. If I take my bike over, it'll be okay.
Well, bikes belong at the Olken residence.
Yes.
Let's see. We've got Carlina de la Cova says Charles Treplek and Jerry Margolin would have excellent collections for us to browse. Absolutely.
Yes. And also Bonnie McBird corrects her message and says, "That's thing I was referring to, not thong." But when the thong, Bonnie, is over,
For many people, yes,
the melody lingers on. So.
that's another kind of broadcast entirely. Incidentally, during these trying times, I saw a few memes, as we are wont to do on social media, and in one case there were a couple of questionably clad women walking down the sidewalk, and the meme said the strip club is closed, but they're doing delivery now. So that's it. I don't have my instant rim shot sound effect queued up here. Sorry about that.
Steve Mason has advised me to be turning in this direction so
Here
that I could appear to be
Burt,
looking at you.
There's a sound delay here. Ready?
Yes.
Here we go. You didn't get that?
I did get that.
Okay. Yeah. It was lead balloon.
Yes.
Right. Well, so it sounds like the notion of show and tell would be a lot of fun too. Obviously, with video, we have the ability to do that. And I think, we could do papers. I would think they would have to be shorter to make this really engaging. We don't want someone droning on and on and on and on like a podcast. But talks as well, getting the discussion going like we're doing here and eliciting feedback from the audience, I think is a lot of fun. It gives everybody a way to become involved, whether or not they want to be on video. So that gives us a whole range of things to do differently.
Yeah, I think so. The challenge, though, is that video isn't easy for people, particularly if you're reading a talk. And if you're looking at a screen where, basically on the screen, somebody, you have a picture of somebody reading something. That gets old fast unless you limit it to a couple of minutes.
It does. It does. Well, we can see. Well, I want to be mindful of the time here. We do want to keep this contained. We have a few more comments. We do want to get to the canonical couplet. We'll still continue that tradition here in the live recording, which is again going to be a little challenging as we try to get all of the sound effects and the music going. So stick with us for that. But before we truncate the discussion here, you were mentioning about things that you are grateful for, Burt. You mentioned the Baker Street Journal. What else are you grateful for in this time of Sherlockians and solitude and isolation, when we still have to remain connected with each other and with the craft in some kind of way?
Well, I wish there was more music things that I could talk about. I'm very grateful about music. I mean, I have been spending more time listening to music, and there's some really interesting things, but they've got nothing to do with Sherlock Holmes. But the quick things that I gathered that I'm grateful for, in addition to the Baker Street Journal, include the Sherlock Holmes Journal from the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And one of my own personal interests or hobbies is scouting. Now, scouting is in sort of awful situation today, but this is a lovely thing by Roger Johnson in the latest Sherlock Holmes Journal, which sort of makes a connection between Baden-Powell, who was the founder of scouting, and Conan Doyle, and other things, and refers to Howard, who commented earlier, who found an article in Aberdeen Weekly reporting the return from South Africa of Corporal Charles Rose and the siege of Mafeking and so on. So I found, this connection in the Sherlock Holmes Journal to scouting really interesting. So I'm grateful these things turn up in my mailbox. I'm grateful for the Baker Street Almanac, which I haven't seen. I've seen the PDF for 2020, but this is Ross Davies' new publication, the Baker Street Almanac, in two versions. One is the well, they're both obviously the print version, but he's got this is the packaging, the elaborate packaging that you get if you subscribe to the print edition. And one of the things we all did, or some of us did back in January, was sign up for the 2021. And that is lovely. And then the other thing I'm grateful for, in addition to the White Company, is this. I mean, I had not devoted any time to sitting down and reading.
Explain to our audio listeners who are catching this on audio only what this is.
Oh, I'm holding up books, you silly people, on the radio with pictures. And you've missed me holding up the Sherlock Holmes Journal and the Baker Street Journal, but this is The Worst Man in London. This is a facsimile of the original manuscript of Charles Augustus Milverton, which is a great intro by Dan Stashower and Costa Rosakis. And
we're planning on talking to the two of them at some point in the future about that very book.
Yeah.
We make it a point to speak to the editors and authors of the BSI manuscript series each year. And I think we'll continue on that, as well as from the Profession series. We'll have Marino Alvarez and Tim Greer on with us as well. So look for those in future episodes.
Yeah. So that's it. What are you grateful for? What's eased? I mean, other than an occasional Manhattan or a gin and tonic, what has eased your travail here?
I was introduced to a rather odd piece of internet. I've been online for almost as long. Well, not almost as long as the internet has been around.
You founded the internet.
No, I invented the paperclip. Actually, that's my claim to fame. No, I've been online since the early 90s, and I like to think I've explored every nook and cranny of the internet. I once got to a page that said, "You've reached the end of the internet. Go home." But I had never heard of this, and it started when I received a strange package in the.
Oops.
Sorry.
Oops.
I'm playing with the controls here, looking to give myself full screen. I received a priority mail package, standard kind of stuff, and I noticed it was from New Jersey. New Jersey. And the address there is, I don't know if you can see the return address name. It's from Elsie Patrick Cubitt.
Good old Elsie.
Royal Pines Hotel, Lakeside Boulevard, Bayville, New Jersey. And I thought, well, is Burt sending me something? And I opened it up, and it was a package that was packed in newsprint. But the newsprint, as you can see, was a little yellowing. And I didn't do that good of a job unwrapping it, because I just tore it to shreds as I normally do. But the newsprint was from, where are my glasses here? The newsprint was from 1949, Newark, New Jersey, the Newark Sunday News. It was a crime club book. Murder Makes Me Nervous. And here's the, you can see a little bit of the print here. Murder Makes Me Nervous by Margaret Scherf. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And inside was this book, a book of real fairies, which included the Cottingley photographs. Well, we all know about Conan Doyle and his involvement with the Cottingley fairies, right? He became such a believer that he gave great credence to this hoax that was pulled off by these two young girls. And, you go inside and, there's the famous Cottingley fairies photographs that they took and sent around. Here's the one. It turns out that these were real photographs, but these were paper dolls that were dressed up like fairies. And inside this package was also this shadow box, which looks like the skeleton of a fairy. You can see the skeleton there and the wings in this shadow box. And I thought, well, this is rather odd. And I went to I went to a site that was listed on the return address label. I don't know if you can see that. It says 10parcels.com. 10parcels.com. And it is evidently some kind of online scavenger hunt where everybody gets, well, there's 10 people involved and they all get a different parcel, and they're supposed to come together to share what they've got and to determine what each means to the other. You know, I have no knowledge of what the other folks receive, but when we each share what came in our package, it suddenly dawns on people what's going on. And as I looked rather closely at the Cottingley Ferries book, I said, well, what year did this book come out? And I looked on the inside of the book where you would normally find copyright information and such. And lo and behold, look at the bottom corner of that page. What do you see there, Burt?
A letter from the Dancing Men alphabet.
Dancing Men alphabet. That's right. Every single page in this book, as it turns out, has a dancing man on it. And some are in red and some are in black. So I immediately went to my Dancing Men cipher, which I printed out from the internet, where you've got the code and they tell you what every letter is.
Yep.
And I began to decode what was in the book. And the message that I got, and I put the red letters in red. The message I got was fairies unhitch me from this ensnared world to dance upon the mountains like a flame. And S, unhitch, and ensnared were the letters and words that were that were in red. And it turns out that one of the participants in this contest is a guy by the name of J.C. Hutchins. Well, if you take unhitch and letter S and unscramble them, it's Hutchins ensnared. So he was immediately the next up in this round robin of mystery boxes, and absolutely was thankful for the clues that I gave him, and he's off and running on the next person in line. So I'm grateful for things like that are a little out of the ordinary and engaging and involve both real life, like IRL stuff, as well as the internet, because I think we still need that combination of real life and virtual life.
So who is sending Hutchins a box? Are you sending Hutchins a box?
No, it's all came from some central figure.
Some Moriarty-like figure.
Something like that. But it's
so. How did you get a hold of Hutchins?
I actually Googled. I went to 10parcels.com, and then I went on to Twitter and I did a search for 10parcels.com, and there was some obscure Twitter account that mentions a discussion group on Discord. So I downloaded the Discord app and I joined that discussion group, which is like a Slack channel, basically. It's usually for gamers. And suddenly I entered into this discussion room with these guys and gals, and Charles is absolutely right. The site is rather cryptic. And yes, Steve Coulson, it is J.C. Hutchins that we both know from way back in the early days of the internet. And I found all these guys and gals and had this discussion with them and kept, kind of putting my clues in. And, suddenly their eyes were opened and they were off and running down their channels as well. And
thanks to you, the Chinese government now has your social security number.
Something like that.
It's interesting, though, those photographs, a lot of people don't know the true history of the Cottingley Ferries. Those photographs, actually, the fairies were real. It's the girls that were paper dolls. And not a lot of people appreciate. I mean, if you're a little fairy, the idea of really doing, we should talk to Frank Cho about this, but really making a detailed black and white little paper doll like that for a black and white illustration is tough. I mean, first of all, they don't have 5. Well, we could talk more about it another time.
They don't have 5 fingers. You think they have like the Mickey Mouse gloves?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah.
That's where Walt actually got the idea.
That's where Tinkerbell comes from, right?
Well, no, Tinkerbell is a whole other story. Tinkerbell actually was at the Disney studio illegally.
Oh, well, we don't want to out anybody there.
No.
That could be a problem. So I wanted to acknowledge a few things. I mean, as I was telling this story, I know a lot of comments came in fast and furious in the comment section. So I apologize if I missed that. But one thing to point out that our friends at the Beacon Society are doing is they are sending out weekly puzzles and games for people to play to keep them involved and engaged. So if you're not yet part of the Beacon Society or supporting the Beacon Society in some way, go over to their site. I believe there's an email sign up there where you can get on their list and you can see what these puzzles are. It's also a great time to do a little bit of homework yourself. You know, we mentioned the Fortescue Scholarship Program, I believe, when Steve and Denny were on the show talking about the Beacon Society. Get your PhD in Sherlockianism if you can. That's part of the tripartite quiz and test program there with the Fortescue Scholars, an opportunity to get certified in the Sherlockian world.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting certified.
Well, you are certifiable, so it
Yes,
should.
I'm very close. Very close.
I would imagine. All right. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and people have some great ideas here. So let's close out here and get over to what we need to do in terms of business with the quiz, because we do have a lucky winner waiting in the wings.
Now, you may need a few minutes to get the wheel. Don't you need the wheel?
Oh, the prize wheel. That's a good point. I was going to have the kids bring that in from the other room. You know what I may do is I may actually just do the virtual version of that.
Okay. Good idea.
I think that'll be okay. Okay. Well, let's see then. We gotta roll out our famous Happy Go Lively music. Yes. It's everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show. That's right. It's Canonical Couplets. It's the game where we allow you to listen to our rantings and ravings and determine if you can figure out what we're talking about. I know it's usually a stretch for most people. So in this case, we read 2 lines of poetry that describe one of the stories in the Sherlockian canon, and we give you the opportunity to guess what it is. And last time around, here's what we said. The way a cow-like girl was taken in bids us beware of our kith and kin. Burt, I almost hesitate to ask, but do you know which story we're talking about?
Yes, that is the case that involved all of those nefarious activities around auditioning young women for roles on the London stage. That was A Study in Starlets.
Wow. Well, I wish our audio listeners could see my reaction, but I think you probably can guess what it looks like since we're so used to this from Burt. No, Burt, as usual, you're wrong. I think we've taken great pride in baking that into the show, so I'm happy for that. The answer we were looking for is A Case of Identity.
Oh, right. That was my second choice.
Well, you know, we can't always be a winner, right?
Yep.
Well, in this case, we do have a winner, but we need to go to our famous spinning prize wheel to determine who that is, because we like to do this completely at random. No fair shakes for anyone. So let me just spin the big prize wheel here. Watch as it slows down and lands on number 17. I love it when we get that canonical number here. Number 17. And in that case, that corresponds to Tom Huntington. Tom Huntington, 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. 17. Tom, congratulations once again. You are the winner of, let's see, what did we have last time? It was a copy of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. This is, of course, a publication from Edgar Smith. You recall Edgar put this together in the 1940s as part of the BSI publications. And this was done, I think, post-mortem. Edgar P. Smith was the publisher, but it was put together by his father, Edgar W. Smith. So we'll be getting a copy of that off to you in short order, Tom. And now that means that it is time for this episode's canonical couplet. And before we take you there, we got to let you know what it is that we are offering for a prize this time around. We went into the IHO's vaults and we came up with a number of things, but I think you're going to be pleased with, well, I want the tension to mount here. There it is. We have a copy of the Sherlock Holmes Companion by Michael and Molly Hardwick. It's a fine volume, also from the 1960s. And if you guess this week's canonical couplet correctly, you'll win this prize. Here it is. Dogs don't make mistakes, claimed Sherlock Holmes. That uncovered the ruse, as did some old bones. If you know the answer to this week's canonical couplet, jot it down in an email. Send it to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among the lucky right answers, we will take your name and send you a prize. Good luck. Phew. Boy, this live stuff is really a bear.
Yeah. Now, Anne Margaret Lewis says she won something but never arranged to get it. So it sounds like we owe Anne Margaret something.
Well, Anne, that's because you have to respond to our plaintive emails and send us your mailing address so we can get it off to you. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And for those of you answering here in the thread, congratulations. You're giving everyone advance notice of what the answer is if you're getting it right. Again, we said send an email to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the title. Comment@ihearofsherlock.com. Good luck. And Nancy, you're absolutely right. It is not Silver Blaze. So we've already eliminated that. I guess the only answer that people have is the improbable. Well, Burt, can you believe we've done it again?
Oh, boy.
For the first time, for the last time.
Yes, it's amazing.
This has been a lot of fun. And I want to specifically thank all of our listeners and viewers for taking a long afternoon, a long morning with Holmes, whatever it is in your time zone, perhaps a long evening if you're tuning in from Europe. We do appreciate having you with us and making this as much fun as it is, because believe me, Burt would not have had as much fun if it was just me with him.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true. Although I'm very happy for all the participation. I'm sad that Bonnie must be sequestered in London, which means it's going to be a while before she's back over here. I hope she's staying away from Boris Johnson.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Someone said, why is Boris Johnson getting tested for coronavirus and I'm not? And the answer was, Sharon, he runs the country. You have to ask Facebook what the number for the doctor is. So, well, fantastic. So, well, thank you all for being with us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. And we will expect you to join us once again on episode 190 for our next interview. We can't say necessarily whether it will be a live one, but we can guarantee you a show that is filled with lots of entertainment, scholarship, and erudition as usual, even though this show had none of that. In the meantime, Burt and I joined together in saying,
the games
of
afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck. And believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
And we are out.
Well done.
This is the best part, when everybody gets to see behind the scenes as to what goes on here. They think we shut off the camera and the microphones, but we're still running.
Oh, wonderful.
No, serious shout outs to Ruben and Susan and Bonnie and Claire and Badre and Ty, John, Nancy, Steve Doyle was here, Mickey and Susan. Fantastic.
Oh,
wait, you're undoing the bow tie, Burt?
well, we're off the air.
What? You?
How
So
else am I going to know that we're off the air?
that home delivery stripper stuff is happening now, or what?
Yeah.
Oh boy! Hey, this is something I do on my my own personal YouTube channel. I got to move the microphone here. Maybe I'll go wide angle here.
Oh, you do the tying. Yeah, you
Yeah,
do the.
I have a YouTube series.
Yep, I know.
Fit to be tied.
Yep.
Where I welcome people to the show and I start talking as I'm tying my bow tie.
Yep.
Which is really a talent because I can't usually walk and chew gum at the same. Well, that's not true. I actually was trained playing the accordion, which is why I can do this. I can.
I've never seen you chew gum.
You never want to see me play the accordion either. So
I've seen you play the accordion. You play very well, but I've never seen you chew gum, not even when you're walking or sitting. So I don't know that you can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Hey, Ashley. Ashley asks where she can send the dollar bills. Just kind of making it rain on us. That's at patreon.com/I Hear of Sherlock. I'm so glad you asked, Ashley.
Yeah.
So, and just to acknowledge a couple of people, Jennifer, yes, that is a leg lamp in the background that you can see there.
Oh, I didn't notice that. You got a leg lamp.
It's a major award,
It's
actually.
a major award for Gilly. Yeah.
And Luann, yes, that's a gasogene over there. Technically a seltzogene, I think.
Yeah.
So, and Burt, we do not need a cameo appearance from Grace. Nobody. Well, I was going to say nobody wants to see that. I don't want to see that because we've got our hands full. You try being sequestered with a 6-year-old with unbounded amounts of energy for 15 days straight and see how much hair you have left. Oh wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. That's right, Anne. It is fragile.
Fragile. Yeah. Fun.
By the way, I misspoke. Luann said I like the gasoline, Scott, or is it seltzogene? Good old spell check. Do that. So there's a lot of comments here. Mike McClure was here. Tom Huntington. Tom heard his win live. That's
good.
That's amazing. Well, we'll have to come up with some other prizes and do some live prize giving as well. So, but a lot of good comments that we'll have to get back to as we've seen them flowing in. It's a bit of a juggling act here as we're trying to have the conversation, pay attention to each other, watch the stream, cue up the music. This is not that easy. So thank you all for your patience. Thank you for participating. And this calls for a good stiff drink. That is not a martini jug in the background, but I think it's likely going to be fairly soon. So, and Ruben keeps calling out your microphone, Burt. Ruben really loves your microphone.
Oh, the mic. Well, thank you, Ruben. Yeah. Well, but you've got a very nice mic. Well, this is a Bob Heil mic. I just always.
Yours?
Yeah, this is a It's by Bob Heil. It's a Heil. The problem is with the gain. On my board. Well, I don't know. It's all right, but but I like it. I've always liked it. It's a great sound.
Well, you know what they say: nothing venture, nothing gained. Sorry. All right, gang. Well, thanks so much for being here. We're going to have the show edited and turned around for our audio listeners for tomorrow. That's how this works. The 15th and 30th of every month. We have some great big shows coming up for you in the future. And thanks, as always, for everything you do for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Share our site, subscribe, email, or Facebook, or whatever notifications you want. And tell other people about us. If you enjoy it, odds are other Sherlockians will too. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, we will. And enjoy the Glenmorangie, Bonnie. That's a great idea.
Yes, indeed. All right, guys. Bye.
British Summertime must be in